everybody. It is Wednesday, June 26th. You're listening to the Mo News Podcast. I'm Moshe Wanunu.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. And today I'm also trying to talk to folks so you don't have to get the bottom line on what's happening here in Washington.
That's right. Today, Moshe is on location, but like actually on location, not just at his in-laws' house down the street. So Moshe, what are you doing in Washington, D.C.?
So it's a big week here. We're waiting on a couple huge cases on the Supreme Court. So stay tuned on Instagram the next couple of days and on this podcast as we await a couple major cases. Over on Capitol Hill, they had meetings yesterday with Israeli leaders, including the defense minister. So was meeting with both of the American side and the Israeli side. So we'll have a bit of that in today's podcast. And of course, what everyone's talking about here in Washington, they're waiting for the debate tomorrow night. So I was getting a sense of how some leaders on both sides are feeling about what's going to happen. A lot of anticipation, a lot of we just don't know how this is about to go down. So one of those rare events in Washington where you don't know what the result's going to be. You're going to have to watch the live 90 minutes.
Well, Moshe, we will certainly be watching. I was actually on my friend Baker Machado, who I used to work with previously. He has a new podcast, and I was his guest, and I'll be posting it on my Instagram, Jill R. Wagner, when it comes out tomorrow. But he was asking me what I thought about the ratings, that if this was going to be a highly watched debate. So I said I would think so, just because these are two men who have not been in the same room with each other, and we haven't really heard from them in this environment for so many years. At the same time, we are talking, end of June? It's so early that I for those reasons, it's like it's either going to be, I could see it being really, really heavily watched just because people are curious. But I also don't know if everyone is paying attention yet. It is still so early in terms of the election season. And as we talked about before, I mean, a lot of parents, people are away. It is the throes of summer. Kids are getting ready for camp. Kids are at camp. So I don't know. I think it's a wild card to see in terms of viewership.
I think ultimately there may be a moment or two, and those moments will live on in social media. And that is how the vast majority of the public will develop their sense of what took place in the debate. I think there's only a certain group of people that actually will take a moment and devote their Thursday evening to it. That said, we are among those people. And if you're among those people who want the live experience, in addition to watching the debate, stay tuned to Instagram tomorrow night. We'll be doing live commentary on the debate, be pausing at certain moments to tell you what just happened. And so make sure to join the Mo News Instagram feed tomorrow during the debate.
Okay, now let's get to some headlines, starting with gun violence here in the United States. The Surgeon General says it is a public health crisis, and he wants lawmakers to take action. Overseas, Kenya's parliament burns as protesters object to new taxes. And we'll have the latest out of the Middle East, including what Moshe is learning in Washington. Plus, after years, literally years, of a standoff with the United States, Julian Assange agrees to plead guilty in exchange for release. In a blow to President Biden, a judge has halted a key part of his student loan forgiveness plan, and that risks relief for millions of Americans. And a federal judge has rejected the $30 billion settlement between Visa, Mastercard, and retailers. So what happens now? And meet the sisters who broke the world record for the highest combined age of 6 living siblings. Plus, Moshe is on this day in history.
Jill, a couple of the most famous statements in presidential history. And no, again, it's not
what the definition of is?
No, two different presidents, significant statements on this day. Jill, stay tuned.
Okay, America's top doctor, U.S. Surgeon General Vivek Murthy, issuing a first-of-its-kind advisory on Tuesday, declaring gun violence a national public health crisis, and that is driven by the fast-growing number of injuries and deaths involving firearms in this country. They are now the leading cause of death for children and teens. The doctor providing some pretty staggering statistics. He says the rate of gun violence in the U.S. is anywhere from 5 times to 121 times higher than any other high-income country in the world. And a staggering 54% of adults report that they or a family member have experienced a firearm-related incident, which means that they have been personally threatened with or injured by a firearm, lost a family member, witnessed a shooting, or shot a firearm in self-defense. Here is a bit of the Surgeon General's announcement.
What is especially devastating is how this has affected our children. Firearm violence has become the #1 cause of death among children and adolescents, more than car accidents or drug overdoses.
And he says that the toll that that's taking is not only physically, but also on the mental health of both kids and parents. Moshe, I remember talking to psychotherapist Nero Feliciano on this podcast last year. It was all about just teen and mental health and social media, which is on the Interview podcast feed still, if you want to take a listen to it. And she told a story about how she was in Australia with her daughter, who at one point turned to her and said something like, "Wow, it is so nice to walk around and not be worried that I'm going to be shot or that there's going to be a shooting." And Nero said it was like an aha moment for her because it had never really occurred to her the mental toll that gun violence was taking on her children.
Yes, at the same time, we should note that mass shootings, despite getting all the media attention here in this country, very, very rare. They actually only account for 1% of firearm deaths in the U.S. What actually gets much less reported on when you look at the overall amount of Americans who die by firearms, the majority, about 60%, are by suicide. About 28,000 of the 48,000 people killed from guns in 2022 were from suicide, the other 40% homicide. So it really speaks to the access and availability of guns, especially among those with mental health issues. That's an issue, as well as, again, not mass shootings, but a lot of the urban violence, the gang violence that you see in a number of American cities like Memphis, Chicago, and others. So the Surgeon General here gets specific in his report. He actually goes into that, noting, again, that mass shootings make up 1% despite the media attention, but outlining just the issue we're having in this country with firearm violence, how it's impacting victims. And so the Surgeon General here is limited in terms of what he can do. He makes this declaration and he lays out a bunch of policy suggestions. Well, who has to take that up? Lawmakers, whether at the state level or federal level. They're the ones who need to pass laws here, potentially. The Surgeon General pointing to tobacco, to motor vehicle crashes, saying it's actually possible to lower the death rate when policymakers get involved and come up with smart policies. And you've seen that in the decrease of tobacco-related disease. You've seen that with a significant decrease in the number of motor vehicle crashes. You know, laws like seatbelt laws and various regulations they've imposed on car manufacturers in terms of airbags. So that's effectively what Murthy's talking about here. He's talking about semi-automatic rifles. He's talking about universal background checks. He's talking about requirements to lock up your weaponry. But again, none of those things can happen without state legislatures or Congress taking action. And you heard it last week from the Supreme Court. Even Justice Alito, a conservative, who said, listen, we're going to overturn the bump stock ban because this is something Congress has to do, not something the ATF can do. And it's interesting, Jill, when you look at the state level, you're seeing two different directions happen this year. You got lawmakers in Michigan. You have lawmakers in Pennsylvania who are talking about a number of gun bills relating to storage requirements, gun-free zones, prohibiting bump stocks, other changes to increase background checks. And then you have other states like Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, where they're making it easier to buy guns right now. So really, the map is very different. But you got the Surgeon General saying, you know, the least I can do is declare this an issue, hope that that raises attention and that policy can change from this point on.
Okay, now to a developing story overseas. In Kenya, crowds of protesters on Tuesday violently fought their way into Kenya's parliament, where lawmakers were debating a bunch of tax increases aimed at stemming the country's debt crisis. Police opened fire on protesters in the capital of Nairobi, killing several people and injuring dozens. There's television footage that shows smoke rising from sections of parliament. So listen to this interview with one of the protesters who happens to be Alma Obama, the older half-sister of former U.S. President Barack Obama. So she was actually tear-gassed by police during an interview with CNN live on air while protesting against the bill.
Live on CNN. Why are you here today?
I'm here because look at what's happening. Young Kenyans are demonstrating for their rights. They're demonstrating with flags and banners. I can't even see anymore. They're being tear gassed. They're being
By the way, Amma is one of Obama's 8 half-siblings. Several live in Kenya. Most these protests seem to be led by young people who had voted for the president, William Ruto, to take power on the promise of economic relief. The government is badly in debt and, again, looking to raise taxes as a way to increase funds.
Yeah, the Kenyan president there won that election on a platform of championing the working poor, but has been caught between the competing demands of lenders like China and the International Monetary Fund, which is urging the government to cut deficits, obtain more funding, and a population that is impoverished and says they cannot handle any more taxes. So right now, Kenya is in the grip of these nationwide protests against these proposed tax hikes, culminating in this total shutdown of the country. A reminder, Kenya is about 54 million people, one of the more populous countries in Africa. They are demanding that the president withdraw the bill that would introduce the major tax increases here, saying that ordinary Kenyans are struggling. But again, Kenya is in a lot of debt right now. In fact, nearly 60% of the country's revenue goes towards paying off their debts. Who are their debt holders? Well, China has lent about 75% of that money. China has this whole strategy called Belt and Road. We'll dive into that on the Mo News Premium account over on Instagram. But they're lending to developing countries around the world in Africa, Asia, and South America, and then they want their money back. And it's got to be paid back. So you have heard from some of these countries that the new imperialists of the 21st century are the Chinese. At the same time, you do have some of these debts coming due from the World Bank and IMF, which are run by Western countries for the most part. So this is Kenya raising taxes to pay off the rest of the world. Kenyan people not so happy about it. But given how these protests have unfolded, the Kenyan president saying this has gone way beyond what it should have. He called what happened treason yesterday. He says that it's been hijacked. These protests have been hijacked by dangerous people. So he's planning to still sign this finance bill. At the same time, the protesters are saying we're coming for every politician.
All right, time for the speed read. Let's start overseas with a roundup of headlines coming out of the Middle East. Senior UN officials have warned Israel that they will suspend the world body's aid operations across Gaza unless Israel acts urgently to better protect humanitarian workers. The ultimatum is the latest in a series of UN steps demanding that Israel do more to safeguard aid operations from strikes by its forces and to curb growing lawlessness that's hindering humanitarian workers. The army claims it is trying to facilitate aid shipments and accuses Hamas of disrupting them, noting Tuesday that Hamas fired a projectile at the humanitarian route near a UNICEF aid convoy.
So U.S. officials are chiming in here saying they're talking with both the UN and the Israelis on how to resolve these UN concerns. It comes as the Israelis have opened up a whole bunch of crossings for aid, but then the UN isn't able to protect its own convoys within Gaza as they go along this route from groups like Hamas, other armed groups, and then in some cases just gangs of people who climb aboard these trucks and grab the aid before it arrives where it's supposed to go. So you're still seeing this stuff end up in markets, but marked up prices. This is meant to be free aid, but it's being sold in the markets. In some cases, you're seeing illegal contraband. Cigarettes going for $25 right now in Gaza, according to the Wall Street Journal. In some cases, cigarette packs being hidden inside carved out watermelons and other produce to get it into Gaza. And so some of these people and these gangs climbing aboard to figure out where the contraband is, where the cigarettes are, so they can make some real money in Gaza. So the Israeli military is saying they're letting in the aid. The UN saying you got to do more. You got to protect it within Gaza. The Israelis effectively saying that's not our role here. So they have to resolve all of this. All of this comes as here in Washington, you have a number of major meetings happening between senior Israeli officials, including the Israeli defense minister and top U.S. officials, Tony Blinken, over the State Department, Lloyd Austin, the defense secretary. And while there is still a focus on Gaza, the big issue here in Washington is Iran, preventing a potential all-out war with Hezbollah, and the fact that there is a belief that Iran is getting closer and closer to nuclear weapons. The defense minister, Yoav Gallant, telling the U.S. defense secretary time is running out right now to prevent Iran from getting nuclear weapons, stressing that Israel and the U.S. must work together to prevent this threat from coming to fruition.
Also from NBC News, the families of 3 hostages held now in Gaza since October 7th have released video of their loved one's abduction. The parents of Hersh Hersh Goldberg-Polin, a 23-year-old Israeli-American who was kidnapped by Hamas on October 7th, said that the newly released video should serve as a call of action to do everything possible to free the remaining hostages. His father, John, telling NBC News, "That is our son. We want all viewers of this video to think in that kind of personal way about what we are dealing with here."
Yeah, you're seeing more and more that the hostage families, now that their loved ones are still being held 220 some days since October 7th, are releasing video, really graphic video of their loved ones, trying to ensure that attention remains on getting their loved ones out. You see Hersh in the bed of a pickup truck after Hamas in the attack blew off one of his arms. He's alongside two other captives. The concern among these families as they release this is that every day they are held, it diminishes the chances of bringing them back safely. At the same time, here in Washington, they discussed the latest on the ceasefire plan. This is the plan that Biden rolled out officially from the Israelis several weeks ago. You saw some back and forth earlier this week. The Israeli prime minister doing an interview with Israeli television saying that he's not quite ready for the whole deal, then correcting himself with the Americans saying, no, I still support the deal. The defense secretary, the U.S. defense secretary, Lloyd Austin, saying yesterday, it's still on Hamas here. The failure of Hamas to accept this proposal is prolonging the agony of Palestinian civilians and Israeli civilians. Those are Austin's words there. At the same time, Netanyahu's government still under pressure from these families, from parts of Israeli society, to prioritize the return of the captives, even if it means a pause, even long-term pause, to the war in Gaza. Now, soon enough, Jill, within a week or two, approaching 9 months of that war.
Yeah, the concern from some Israeli analysts that I was listening to is that Hamas, as we've been talking about, genuinely has no real incentive here to take any type of ceasefire deal. And in fact, they're hoping that Hezbollah and Israel go to war. And if that happens, it would be for Hamas, at least they feel, a chance for them to actually survive, because Israel would have to refocus on Lebanon.
Yeah, they would get a breather, so to speak. At the same time, the Israeli prime minister is dancing here with his political coalition, because while the majority of the country and the majority of it is ready to agree to the ceasefire, he's got parts of his right wing that are not. So he's dancing rhetorically around all of this. And so sadly, hanging in the balance here are the lives of these hostages, as well as any sense of return to normalcy for the vast majority of Gazans.
All right, this next story from the New York Times, a court hearing half a world away that we've been watching. Julian Assange, the founder of WikiLeaks, agreed to plead guilty this week to a single felony count of illegally obtaining and disclosing national security material in exchange for his release from a British prison. This deal brings an end to a prolonged battle that started after Assange revealed state secrets in the 2010s. Moshe, we're going to try to walk through some of the history
Jill,
here.
when this story first became news, we were in our 20s. Remember those days?
Barely. Okay, so if you remember, though, some of the material that was leaked was about American military activity in Iraq and Afghanistan, as well as confidential cables shared among diplomats. Assange was in his early 30s when this all started. He's now, by the way, 52. He has spent more than a decade on the run, living in the Ecuadorian embassy in London, and then the last 5 years he spent in a British prison. He requested to appear before a federal judge at one of the more remote outposts of the federal judiciary. It is the courthouse in Saipan, the capital of the Northern Mariana Islands. That is a U.S. territory. Assange has been opposed to extradition to the U.S. mainland, but he did agree to appear in court in that commonwealth in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. It is much closer to his native Australia, where he is a citizen, than the courts in the continental United States or even Hawaii.
Yeah, Jill, it's like literally the most remote U.S. courthouse in the world.
He did some research.
He's like, that's where, he has trust issues with the U.S. government, given that he stole hundreds of thousands of documents, embarrassed people, put the security of U.S. intelligence agents and U.S. military officials at risk with how much he dumped over the years. Remember, he also worked with Chelsea Manning, who got a reprieve from Trump a few years ago. So this saga has been going on for a very long time. He rose to prominence in 2010 with that leak. Among them, the emails that he helped steal from the Democratic National Committee that led to embarrassing revelations about Hillary Clinton's campaign. So a whole variety of things. But he had multiple legal issues. He also had legal problems in Sweden initially, where he was accused of rape and sexual assault. And so to escape extradition to Sweden, he was able to make a home for himself in the Embassy of Ecuador in London, where he lived for a number of years. Jill, I remember covering that several jobs ago. Pamela Anderson, the actress, used to visit him. I think they dated briefly for a while. So he was in the embassy there in Ecuador. Eventually, the Ecuadorians are very unhappy with the way Assange is living in there. They kick him out of the embassy. By then, the Swedes have decided to give up on their accusations against him. They drop those charges on rape and sexual assault. But then he's then picked up by the Brits at the behest of the Americans, saying, hey, we want him here in America. Brits are like, okay, we'll put him in jail. So then he goes to jail in Britain for the last 5 years, where he's fighting extradition to the U.S. because he thinks he will die in the U.S. His lawyers say he will that he will commit suicide or he may be killed. So he's been fighting that for a while. That then led to these negotiations. So the deal here basically is he's being sentenced to 5 years in prison. Well, where has he already served 5 years in prison? The UK. So it's effectively a scratch. He gets to go to Australia now, a free man, having already served his time. So that's the deal here. And again, it brings an end to a saga that began when we were all much, much younger.
Back here to the U.S., a blow to President Biden's plan to forgive student loan debt. This story from CNBC. Two federal judges in Kansas and Missouri have temporarily halted significant parts of Biden's new student loan repayment plan, putting debt relief for millions of Americans in jeopardy. The rulings stop the U.S. Department of Education from implementing major provisions of the Saving on a Valuable Education, or SAVE plan. Until the cases are decided, the Biden administration is prevented from forgiving any more debt under the new income-driven repayment plan and from further reducing borrowers' payments in July as it planned to.
So this impacts potentially more than 8 million borrowers who have enrolled in the SAVE plan since it launched last August. Those enrolled were less than a week away from seeing their monthly bills drop by half or more as the judge makes this decision. One higher education expert saying borrowers will be disappointed and angry that financial relief was yanked away at the last minute here. The people who've been opposed to a number of the Biden student loan plans over the last couple of years. Remember, Biden announced that really comprehensive plan that was struck down by the Supreme Court because it was fought by Kansas and some other attorneys general from various red states. Those are the same attorneys general that are fighting the piecemeal plan. So Biden tried this very comprehensive plan that was killed by the courts. He's been trying to do it piecemeal, like let's take a nibble here and take a nibble here out of student loans for people. Those minor plans, those smaller plans, still being fought here. And so this is just the latest in the student loan saga as the president tries to bring relief to certain groups. And he's being accused of overstepping his authority and engaging in some unconstitutional policy here by those Republican states. So this won't be the last time you hear about this on this podcast, because this will continue to be fought through the court system.
From CNN, a federal judge overseeing a $30 billion preliminary swipe fees settlement between Mastercard, Visa, and retailers formally rejected the deal Tuesday. The ruling likely means that the credit card processors will have to make more concessions to resolve their longstanding dispute with merchants. Mastercard and Visa, two of the world's largest credit card networks, reached their proposed multi-billion-dollar antitrust settlement with U.S. merchants in March. The settlement would lower swipe fees or interchange fees that a retailer must pay when a customer makes a purchase using their card.
So some merchant groups here are applauding this, saying, oh, we might actually get a better deal here with these huge credit card companies. The credit card companies saying, wait, we had a deal. What happened? So we'll see what they have to come up with. They're back to the drawing board here. Background here, if you're not already familiar as either a merchant or a customer, retailers are typically charged somewhere between 2% and 4% of the total transaction in swipe fees by these credit card companies. That's why sometimes, whether it's gas stations or other stores, you see that you can pay slightly less in cash. That's effectively the retailer telling you that we don't want to give that percentage to the credit card companies. And in this deal, the settlement would have lowered those fees ever so slightly by 0.0 something percent. It appears the judge thought that was not sufficient here. So we'll see what the credit card companies come up with next for the merchants.
And finally, from ABC News, 6 sisters from Missouri are now the world record holders for the highest combined age of 6 living siblings. This is according to the Guinness World Records. The sisters were born into the overall family in Farmington, and they include Norma Jacob, who's 101, Laureen Kohlmeyer, who's 98, Maxine Cole, who's 97, Doris Griffith, who's 94, Margaret Norton, who is 90, and the baby in the family, Elma Jennings, at 88 years old.
Wait, hold on. Let me do the math real quick there, Jill. 101, 98, 97, 94, 90 plus 88. Is that 571?
You're good, Moshe.
I won't pretend to be some sort of savant. Jill had it in the script.
Their ages, by the way, were verified by the Guinness World Records on March 6th of this year. In an interview with Good Morning America, Cole said that the idea to even apply for this title with the Guinness Book of World Records came from her nephew, Dean, who's the son of her oldest sister, Norma Jacob. She said, quote, "He just decided that sounded like we might be eligible, so he started this whole thing." 6
sisters who are all older than the 2 guys running for president right now, Jill.
It's true, Moshe. There are people older than the current presidential candidates.
So Guinness has all these categories. I didn't even know oldest combined age for siblings was a Guinness-worthy record, and it turns out, yes, it is. Apparently, they go through their birth certificates, marriage certificates, school records. They needed to verify the ages here. And so these sisters all grew up during the Great Depression. They have spent many significant life events together. They've apparently taken trips as a group as they've gotten older. They went on a trip to DC. They visited some theme parks in Missouri. Jill, I'm hoping that my father and his siblings, maybe they can compete for that at some point. My dad is actually one of 7. All of them, thank God, all of them alive and well. So I'll have to let my father know that this is an available record for,
this is a thing.
for him, his brother, and his 5 sisters in a few years. I have to add up their ages. Again, that was 571 years between the 6 sisters. So I'll have to go after this podcast to go do some math.
But of course, it's sisters and brothers. So you have to see.
Oh, yeah. So maybe it's my 5 aunts, the 5 sisters. They'll have to all, continue to take good care of themselves. And,
yes.
And we'll talk in about 20 years.
The one thing that I will say, a credit to this family, because you hear all the time about siblings who are estranged or just don't talk to each other anymore. So the fact that 6 of them have stayed as close as they are for all of these years, certainly, again, a credit to their family that did something right.
Though we don't know comprehensively if they had a bad decade or two. Now that their age is between 88 to 101, maybe they've made their peace with whatever went on back in the 1950s, 60s. 90s, whatever. All right, now time. Speaking of history, we go to On This Day in History. On this day in 1945, the UN Charter was formally signed in San Francisco. The UN established after World War II to maintain international peace and security. We know how that's gone. Fast forward to 1963. On this day, JFK visits West Berlin, delivering his famous speech expressing solidarity with the city's residents. Take a listen.
And therefore, as a free man, I take pride in the words, Ich bin ein Berliner.
He declares there, Ich bin ein Berliner. I am a Berliner, though I'm told in the technical German, he should have said Ich bin Berliner, because Berliner itself can be seen as a pastry. And so in the way he said it, he said that he was a pastry, not a resident of Berlin. Nonetheless, we know what JFK actually meant. It came at the time the Soviet Union had taken over. It came at the time where Berlin was split between the communist side and democratic side. Just about 25 years later, the Berlin Wall would come down. All right, a bit of corporate history here. 50 years old today, the UPC barcode. Until 1974, this was not a thing. On this day in 1974, at a supermarket in Troy, Ohio, a 10-pack of juicy fruit became the first product ever to be scanned and purchased with a UPC symbol that are now ubiquitous. They wanted to make checkout more efficient with that scanner technology. And despite some protests for a variety of reasons from companies who didn't want to go through this process of adopting UPC symbols, it was, of course, adopted everywhere. As for why they chose gum as the first experiment here with UPC symbols, they didn't think it would actually work because a pack of gum was so small. So effectively, it was a test of the system. All right, in other famous presidential pronouncements today, on this day in 1990, George H.W. Bush went back on his no new taxes pledge. He had said at one point, read my lips, no new taxes. He concedes 2 years later that some tax increases are required. And so that was one of the issues he faced in his failure to win re-election in 1992.
Yes, a note to any politician. Don't say that, because it was blasted. I still remember the commercials, just never ending, of him saying that, read my lips, no new taxes. And then it was something like, and 2 years later, a tax increase.
You got to watch out what you promise.
Don't say it.
And in a bit of pop culture history, on this day in 1977, the king of rock and roll, Elvis Presley, performs in public for the last time in Indianapolis. He would die just 6 weeks later, a heart attack brought on by drug abuse at the young age of 42. On this day in 1993, That's the Way Love Goes by Janet Jackson hits #1 on the Billboard charts. And finally, you'd be hard-pressed to find somebody who hasn't read one of these books or seen one of these films in any language around the world. On this day 27 years ago, 1997, the first Harry Potter novel was published. Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone was published in the UK. It would be named Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone here in the US, the first of the 8 Harry Potter books.
Moshe, you are talking to one of those people.
Have you read all 8, Jill?
No, I haven't. Oh. I haven't read one.
I see. You'd be hard pressed to find someone who hasn't.
Yes.
And you are all right. Well, we'll add it to the list of things Jill needs to do.
Put it on my summer reading list. Maybe that is what I will start reading.
Or
this
summer
weekend.
watching lists. There's several films you could watch too. You don't have to read them necessarily.
Have you both read the books and seen the movies?
No, I've probably read one of the books and seen 2 of the movies.
Okay, because my hesitation with seeing the movie has always been that I wanted to read the books first.
At this point, Jill, we're giving
Let it go.
Let it go. Just go see a film.
Okay, fair point. All right, everybody. Thank you for listening to the Mo News Podcast. If you like what you hear, please share this with your friends. Please, it will help us grow. Follow us, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store.
Yeah, I got some great notes from people who are like, I just introduced the podcast to my mom. She loves it. I just introduced the podcast to my sister. She loves it. My dad, he loves it. So love these notes anecdotally. Pass them along in review form over on the Apple platform especially. But appreciate all of you spreading the word here for the podcast. And if you haven't already, go check out the Mo News Interview Podcast. You get 2 Mo News podcasts.
Goodbye, everybody.